Now, shaping is a part of operant conditioning. In shaping, what we're doing is we're actually rewarding approximations until we get to a complex behavior. You can't teach a killer whale to do a show uh, just by waiting for her to do a show and then rewarding at the end. That doesn't make any sense. It's not natural for a killer whale to put on a show. So instead, you have to reward the approximations. You might teach her half a trick, like touching your hand with its nose and then rewarding her. Maybe having her jump out of the water, then maybe flipping around or swimming quickly from one side of the pool to the other and rewarding that. And little by little, you reward approximations until you get a really complex behavior. Uh, Meerkats do this naturally. In nature, a lot of animals, including humans, shape certain behaviors. And for meerkats, that comes in the form of eating scorpions. Meerkats eat scorpions, but there's a problem. Scorpions can sting you and they'll kill a meerkat. So if a meerkat pup, tries to kill a scorpion, it's just going to die. So instead, mom shapes the behavior. And she does this by first finding or killing a scorpion and giving the dead carcass to the pup. And the pup just plays around with the carcass until he can break it open and then eat it. And by the way, eating it, that's the reward. That's the reinforcement. Now, mom does this over and over again until the pup masters breaking apart uh, the scorpion and then eating it. And right as he's starting to do that, mom will up the ante. And what she'll do is she will find the scorpion, hurt it, pull the stinger off, and then give the hurt scorpion without a stinger for the pup to eat. So now the pup has to sort of catch it, play with it until he can kill it and break it apart and eat it. And again, she does this over and over and over again until he masters that. And when he masters it, she uh, uh, puts up the ante, or she hires the ante there. So then what she might do is she might hurt the scorpion, but not take off the stinger. And now the pup has to sort of play with the scorpion, try to catch it, pull the stinger off without getting stung, and then break it apart and eat it. And then eventually, mom will just help the pup sort of find its own food, and the pup will do the whole thing. And so, what you have here is a behavior that started out really simple, just sort of playing with a dead carcass, and then became very complex. Uh, hunting, finding the scorpion, pulling it apart, and then eating it, killing it, and eating it. Now, for humans, most human behaviors, most of the things that you think about that make you human, were shaped little by little. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. When you were little, they taught you letters first, and they told you the letters each had a name, maybe even that each letter had a sound. And eventually, someone started reading to you, and maybe they'd help you have you sort of help along by saying a word. Eventually, in school, they started to teach you simple words and how to put those simple words together. And so they'd give you, assignments like this one. Uh, then throughout all of elementary school, they gave you spelling tests almost every week for 4 or 5 years, teaching you lots and lots of different words. And with time, they asked you to put those words into sentences, simple sentences, compound sentence, complex sentences, compound complex sentences. And all the time, they were having your reading skills sort of build up for simple books and slightly more complex books. Then they, helped you sort of analyze scenes or talk about the character's feelings. And eventually they had you do all that by yourself. Now you're in middle school and they have you write a whole essay on, whatever you read. And then eventually, it gets more and more complex. Right now you guys are writing, big term papers. Um, and with time you might end up writing, whole books or dissertations, etc. The same thing with math. At first they taught you numbers, and maybe that each number had um, a name, and that they went in a certain order. And with time, they taught you more numbers, not just from 1 to 10, but from 1 to 100. Um, and then with time, they taught you that each number had a value, and then that you could manipulate those values, right? You could add and subtract, you could multiply and divide. Eventually, you spend a long time learning how to add and subtract and multiply and divide fractions and decimals. And then they started teaching you algebra. And now they ask you to find the slope of a line or something like that, right? These are all behaviors that are now quite complex, but when you first started doing them, were very, very simple. You just got rewarded or punished all throughout. Rewards, great job, you got a good grade, and then of course the punishment, you got the question wrong, or maybe you ended up getting an F because you didn't study hard enough. Things like that, little by little, until you developed a more complex skill. But the truth is that um, even things that you don't think about, having a conversation, that behavior was shaped all throughout your life. Cleaning your room or your house, that was shaped. And if nobody helped you shape that behavior, then now you're 20 or 30 and you're not very good at cleaning up because no one shaped that behavior in you. Um, uh, Even things like eating. We don't eat like the way a baby eats. It's not just the skill of holding a spoon or a fork. There's a lot of behaviors that go into eating like an adult, cutting certain foods, and certain foods maybe grabbing with your hands, and, you know, how to act politely, etc. A lot of behaviors, in fact, most behaviors that we have as humans, were shaped throughout our life. All right, I want to go over just a couple of extra ideas here before I move on to a more complex concept. Let me tell you about extinction. Extinction is when a behavior that you've learned through operant conditioning or classical conditioning just becomes extinguished. It stops. You stop doing it. Now, the the most obvious reason why you stop doing it is because you stop getting rewarded or you stop getting punished, depending on the behavior. So um, maybe, mom started to punish her son because he was staying out late with his friends. She took away his car or something along those lines. And the boy stopped staying out late because he didn't want to get his car taken away. But little by little, he noticed that mom stopped punishing him. And so what happened? He started to stay out late again. Essentially, the behavior of coming home early became extinguished because the punishment stopped. Um, in places like SeaWorld or other aquariums, you have dolphins. Dolphins learn how to do all these flips and stuff. But when a dolphin gets pregnant, you can't have her flipping around because she might lose the pregnancy. And so they stop rewarding her. They stop giving her fishies for doing those flips and exercises. So she stops doing the behaviors. She stops flipping around. Essentially, that behavior becomes extinguished. But that's not the only reason why a behavior might become extinguished. Sometimes, especially in humans, behaviors become extinguished because you went to therapy or you developed a coping mechanism to help you stop doing whatever you were doing. For example, a woman is afraid of dogs. She gets a panic attack every time she sees a dog, but she went to therapy. And over maybe a year or a few months, she stopped having that reaction. And now her phobic reaction has become extinguished. It is extinct now. That is, uh, she does not have a panic attack when she sees a dog. But in the same way that a behavior can become extinguished, you can recover it, because extinguishing a behavior isn't like pressing delete on your computer. You don't erase the behavior, you just stop turning it on all the time. You already learned the behavior, and so the behavior is still in your brain. And so every once in a while, that behavior can randomly come back. And we call that spontaneous recovery. So usually there's a reason for why it comes back. And the reason is usually maybe you're upset or anxious or something is going wrong. And your brain, in trying to fix it, just starts turning on old behaviors. So, for example, maybe the boy has been coming home late for months now. He's 18. Mom doesn't really yell at him anymore about staying out late. But then he had a rough day and he had plans to go out with his friends, but that behavior just turned on. Instead of going out with friends, he decided to come home early. Um, the reality is that the reason that happens is because this person is technically trying to find that reward. This goes, maybe if I turn on this behavior, when I get home, I'm going to get that reward, or I'm going to avoid some punishment. Um, and so all of a sudden, the behavior just comes back, spontaneous recovery. That dolphin had a long pregnancy, 12 months, maybe even a few more months after that in recovery. But now she's feeling kind of good and excited because she's swimming around fast. She's not hurting anymore. And now, just out of nowhere, the behaviors turn back on. And so she'll start flipping around and jumping around. This is, again, a spontaneous recovery. No one's been rewarding her, but that behavior just turned on in hopes that it will turn on a reward. It will bring a reward. Now, for the woman who went to therapy, she's years of not having a phobic reaction, but maybe she's late and out of nowhere, she's like rushing to get into her building at work, and out of nowhere, she sees a dog in the distance. It doesn't even have to be close. And for some reason, that just triggers the old behavior and it turns on. Now she has a phobic reaction, even though she hasn't had one for years, right? So what you see here is that when a behavior becomes extinguished, it doesn't get deleted. You just stop turning it on all the time. And sometimes it will just turn on randomly, and that's spontaneous recovery. Um, Now, as I mentioned also in operant conditioning, we learn to discriminate stimuli in operant conditioning. But specifically, what we learn to discriminate is the environment. Sometimes the environment has a clue about whether or not you're going to get a reward or a punishment. And so um, you go to your friend's house, and you wouldn't go to your friend's house and just stare at him silently for an hour. That would be weird. That would bring punishments. Maybe your friend would think that you're weird or you'd have some social issue. Um, but you do that in school, right? You go to your class and you just stare at your teacher for an hour without saying anything at all. The reason for that is because you know that in one environment, school, that behavior is rewarded or at least not punished, right? You're trying to avoid a punishment. But in your friend's house, that behavior is not going to get a reward. And in fact, it might end up bringing a punishment. Your friend might get angry with you because you haven't said anything to her in an hour, right? So we all discriminate between environments to figure out whether the environment is going to bring a reward or a punishment. I have a bunch of ringtones in my phone, and I know that some ringtones I don't want to pick up, right? There's people I don't want to talk to. And to be honest, sometimes I don't even hear the ringtone when it's that specific ringtone that I don't pay attention to. I don't even notice it. Whereas when it's, my best friend or somebody important in my life, when that ringtone turns on, I hear it automatically. I pay attention to it because I know over the years that some ringtones bring rewards and some ringtones kind of bring a punishment. I'm going to get bored talking to this person.